The movie begins in a college classroom. Gary Johnson, a professor, is giving a lecture about the philosopher Nietzsche. One of his students understands the lesson as a message about taking risks and putting yourself out there. Gary agrees with the idea, but then he hears another student whispering about his car, making fun of it. This makes Gary realize that he hasn't really put himself out there in life. Gary narrates his daily life. He is a quiet man who lives alone with his 2 cats, ID and Ego. Most of his time is spent teaching, grading papers, and following his routine. However, in his free time, he secretly helps the New Orleans Police Department. His job is to catch people who try to hire hitmen. Normally, an undercover cop named Jasper does this job, but he has been suspended for attacking a group of teenagers. Since they need someone to take his place, 2 officers, Claudette and Phil, asked Gary to pretend to be a hitman for an investigation. Their goal is to catch a man who is trying to hire a contract killer. Gary is nervous. He is not a cop, and he knows this could be dangerous. He worries that he might get hurt or even killed. But despite his fear, he decides to go through with it. Gary takes on the identity of Billy, and meets with Craig, the man looking to hire a hitman. Claudette and Phil watch from a safe distance, expecting Gary to struggle, but to their surprise, he fully transforms into his role. He speaks and acts like a dangerous, unhinged killer, making even the officers believe he could be the real deal. Craig, convinced by the act, openly asks Billy to carry out the murder. Once the request is made, Gary takes the money as evidence, and the police move in to arrest Craig. After this success, Gary continues his undercover work, catching more people who try to hire a hitman. Each time, he adapts his persona to fit what the client is looking for, sometimes cold and professional, sometimes violent and unhinged. His performances are so convincing that when the criminals go to trial, many of them claim that Gary tricked them into planning a murder. He is called to testify in their cases, explaining that they were fully aware of what they were doing. Most of them are sentenced to prison, but some manage to walk free. A woman who tried to have her husband killed is forgiven by her husband, leading to her release. In other cases, the jury does not find enough proof to convict the accused. As Gary continues his double life, he notices a change in his students. They pay more attention in class, sensing a new energy in their professor. Though they have no idea about his secret work, something about him has shifted, and they are drawn to it. Gary is later assigned a new case involving a woman named Madison Figueroa Masters. Curious, he looks her up on Facebook and notices something unusual. There is no record of her life before she married her husband, Ray. She has no criminal history, no obvious red flags. Intrigued, Gary agrees to meet her. Disguised as Ron, he sits across from Madison in a diner and listens to her story. She wants her husband dead. She doesn't frame it with anger or malice, she just says she can't bear to be married to him anymore. But something about her captivates Gary. Instead of taking her money, he persuades her not to go through with the hit. He warns her that once she hands him the cash, she'll be implicated in a serious crime. Instead, he suggests she use the money to start fresh, to leave Ray and begin a new life on her own terms. When Gary reports back to Claudette and Phil, they're furious. He had the chance to make an arrest, and instead, he let Madison go free. Their disapproval only worsens when Jasper returns from his suspension. Expecting to get his old job back, Jasper is furious to learn that the sergeant prefers Gary in the role. In fact, the department wants Jasper to stay out of sight to protect their reputation. It's clear the cops trust Gary more now, but Jasper resents being sidelined. A few days later, Gary receives a text from Madison, inviting him to a dog adoption fair. He hesitates. He's a cat person, after all, but he agrees to. While out on a date, Gary and Madison enjoy their time together, unaware that trouble is brewing. As they walk down the street, they run into Ray, who is drunk and accompanied by a friend. Ray's mood shifts the moment he sees Madison with another man. His face twists with anger, and he marches toward them, demanding to know who Gary is. When Madison refuses to answer, Ray raises his hand as if to strike her. Before he can follow through, Gary quickly pulls a gun, his voice calm but firm. The sight of the weapon makes Ray hesitate. He glares at Gary but ultimately backs off, muttering insults as he stumbles away with his friend. Madison, shaken but grateful, takes Gary's hand, and they decide to grab some food to calm down. However, as they step into a diner, Gary's stomach drops. Sitting in the corner is Jasper. He's alone, nursing a drink, but his sharp eyes have already landed on Gary and Madison. Gary tenses, unsure of what Jasper might do, but instead of exposing him, Jasper simply walks over and greets him like an old coworker, never mentioning their real connection. Madison doesn't suspect anything, but Gary knows this isn't a coincidence. Jasper is watching him. Days later, Gary is called in for another hit. The client calls himself Mike, and insists on meeting in person. When Gary arrives at the location, he's met with an unwelcome surprise. Mike is actually Ray. Smirking, Ray sits across from him and lays out his request. He wants Madison and her new boyfriend dead. He's convinced Madison cheated on him and wants revenge. Gary listens, waiting for the moment Ray will say something incriminating, but before that happens, Gary leans forward and drops his fake persona. He makes it clear, he's not a hitman. He's the guy Ray just threatened in the street. He lets Ray stew in realization, his smirk disappearing as he realizes he walked into a trap. Panicked, Ray scrambles out of the diner before he can say anything that would seal his fate. Without wasting time, Gary rushes to Madison's house. He knocks urgently, and when she opens the door, he gets straight to the point. Ray wants her dead. Sometime later, Gary is called into the station. The sergeant informs him that Ray has been found dead, shot in what appears to be a drug deal gone wrong. The news takes Gary by surprise, but something about it doesn't sit right with him. Without wasting time, he rushes to find Madison. When he arrives at her house, he breaks the news about Ray's death. Instead of reacting with shock, Madison looks Gary in the eye and calmly confesses, she killed Ray. She explains that after Gary warned her that Ray wanted her dead, she decided to take action first. She followed him, waited for the right moment, and shot him. Stunned, Gary realizes this is bigger than he thought. Knowing he has no choice, he finally comes clean. He tells Madison he was never a hitman, that he's been working with the police all along. He explains that he started falling for her and that's why he tried to protect her. But Madison doesn't see it that way. Her face twists in anger as she realizes she's been played. She trusted him, she let herself believe in him, and now she knows it was all a lie. Furious, she orders him to leave, slamming the door behind him. Back at the station, the police start putting pieces together. They uncover that Ray had recently increased his life insurance policy by $1 million, with Madison as the sole beneficiary. Suspicion falls directly on her. The sergeant decides they need a confession, and since Madison already trusts Gary, he's their best shot. They wire him up and send him to her house, unaware that Madison already knows the truth. When Gary arrives, he knocks gently, and Madison opens the door, her expression unreadable. Stepping inside, he subtly pulls out his phone and lets it rest on the table, the screen flashing a silent message, "They're listening." Madison quickly catches on. Without missing a beat, she puts on a show, acting shocked, denying everything, and making it seem like she's grieving Ray's death rather than responsible for it. Gary plays along, pretending to console her. The police, listening in from their van, hear nothing but a distraught widow adamantly rejecting the accusation. It's convincing enough to keep them off Madison's back, for now. As Gary heads to Madison's house again, he immediately senses something is off. When he steps inside, he finds Jasper already there, waiting for him. Jasper smirks, leaning back in his chair. He knows everything. About Ray's murder, about Gary covering for Madison, about their secret. And now, he wants a piece of it. Jasper lays it all out. He's planning to blackmail them. In exchange for his silence, he demands a cut of Ray's $1 million insurance policy. He figures it's a fair deal. After all, Gary stole his job, and now he's in deep with a murderer. Madison, keeping her composure, offers Jasper a beer. As he takes a swig, he keeps talking, listing all the ways he could ruin their lives. But soon, his words start slurring. His body sways, his eyes droop. He grips the table, trying to stay upright, but the drug in his beer takes effect. Moments later, Jasper collapses, unconscious. Madison looks at Gary, her hands shaking slightly. I just meant to knock him out, she whispers. Gary, however, sees a way out. He takes a plastic bag and slips it over Jasper's head. Madison watches, uncertain at first, but as Jasper twitches beneath the bag, they both understand, this is the only way. Jasper's struggles slow, then stop. Silence. After a moment, Gary looks at Madison. We'll make it look like a suicide. He was a junkie. No one's going to question it. Madison stares at him, then nods. A slow smile spreads across her face. I love you, she murmurs. Gary meets her gaze. I love you too. Years later, Gary stands at the front of a packed lecture hall. His class has outgrown its old room, and now he teaches to a larger audience than ever. He's respected, admired. His students hang on to his every word. At home, his life is just as perfect. He and Madison are married, raising 2 kids together. Their home is warm and lively, filled with laughter, love, and their 2 dogs. One evening, as they all sit together, their young daughter looks up at them with curious eyes. How did you and Mom meet? She asks. Gary and Madison exchange a knowing glance. Then, with a smile, Gary begins, well, sweetheart, we met at a little cafe one afternoon. Madison nods, adding, and from that moment on, we changed each other's lives. The truth remains unspoken, but they both know, some love stories are best left untold. The film closes with a dedication. In memory of the real Gary Johnson, 1950-2022. A beloved professor, war veteran, animal-loving Buddhist, and a man who committed 0 murders. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe our channel.